Ladies and gentlemen, to those listening tonight, have you felt it too? That quiet unease, that sense that ordinary life is no longer ordinary. One autumn evening in western Pennsylvania, a small town lost power for 11 minutes. Front porches went black, traffic lights died, the grocery store signs disappeared. In that brief darkness, people stepped outside and saw the sky glowing red from wildfire smoke that had traveled across a continent. For a moment, nothing felt local anymore. The danger was far away, yet somehow already at the doorstep. That is how this age feels. A virus begins in one corner of the world and reaches every kitchen table. A war starts across an ocean and raises gas prices in Kansas, rent in Phoenix, and anxiety in small Ohio towns where nobody has ever seen a battlefield. Markets stumble on Wall Street. And a retired couple in Tampa suddenly wonders whether their savings will outlive them. What used to feel separate now arrives in one wave. Health, money, weather, fear, family, faith. Everything touches everything. Some call it bad luck. Some call it politics. Some call it climate. Some call it the price of modern life. But what if these disasters are more than isolated crises? What if they are consequences converging? What if the deepest threat is not a single disease, a single war, or a single storm, but a civilization that mistook comfort for permanence, speed for wisdom, and power for moral safety? For years, people believed progress would save us from history. We built bigger hospitals, faster networks, smarter machines, stronger supply chains. We told ourselves that advanced societies do not truly collapse. They adjust. They innovate. They recover. Yet the last few years have exposed something unsettling. Our systems are efficient but fragile. Our homes are full, but our inner lives are thin. Our nation is loud, but our conscience is tired. And so a harder question rises. Not whether trouble exists, we know it does. The question is why so many forms of trouble are arriving together. Why plague, violence, hunger, moral exhaustion, family breakdown, and spiritual confusion now seem to move in the same weather system. To some that looks like judgment. To others, it looks like cause and effect finally catching up with a proud and restless age. Either way, the pattern deserves to be faced, because once the first crack appears, the whole structure starts speaking. The first warning did not arrive with drums or banners. It came on hospital floors. It came in silence, in masks, in ventilators, in video calls between the living and the dying. A nurse in Chicago worked 12-hour shifts and stopped counting body bags because numbers no longer felt human. A businessman in Dallas who once believed money could solve anything found himself begging for one more day of oxygen. A grandmother in Newark died without the hand of her daughter in her own. In those months, one truth stripped itself bare. Human pride is not immunity. For generations, Americans were taught to trust systems, medicine, insurance, technology, expertise. Those things matter, they save lives. But the pandemic revealed something they cannot erase. We are still mortal. We are still vulnerable. Beneath modern confidence, the human body remains painfully fragile. One invisible organism brought cities to a halt. You emptied highways, closed churches, buried plans, and humbled nations that once spoke as if history had already been conquered. Some saw only biology. Others saw a moral alarm. Not because every victim deserved suffering. That would be cruel and false. But because calamity often reveals what comfort conceals. It revealed exhausted workers holding up entire hospitals. It revealed loneliness so deep people unraveled in quiet apartments. It revealed how quickly fear can divide neighbors, families, and even congregations. It showed how thin our patience was, how easily suspicion grew, and how badly many souls needed something stronger than information. A crisis like that does not create character. It exposes it. It reveals what a society worships when survival is on the line. In some homes, people rediscovered prayer. In others, outrage became routine. In some communities, strangers carried groceries to the elderly. In others, every conversation turned into accusation. The same storm
can't
passed
bear
through every
this.
town, but it did not
Goodbye,
produce
Grandpa.
the same spirit. And that is why the plague mattered beyond disease. It was not only a medical emergency. It was a mirror. It showed the limits of wealth, the loneliness of modern life, and the danger of believing that human control is absolute. When a civilization stops respecting its own limits, even a microscopic threat can expose the illusion. The first warning was simple. You are not as secure as you thought. The second would be louder, hotter, and written in fire. War rarely begins in the places where ordinary people pay the price. It begins in offices, in strategy rooms, in speeches about security, influence, deterrence, as of borders, and national honor. Then the language reaches the young. A 20-year-old in uniform becomes the one standing in mud, heat, and smoke. A mother becomes the one staring at the phone. A child becomes the one learning the sound of panic before learning long division. That is the oldest pattern in human history. Ambition speaks in policy. Sorrow answers in blood. Many Americans watch foreign wars through screens. Yet even at a distance, war enters the home. Fuel prices rise, shipments stall, fear spreads. Families with roots overseas stop sleeping well. Veterans in Missouri or Arizona hear old sounds in new headlines. Children ask whether the world is ending because they have seen too many maps glowing red on television. Distance no longer protects the mind. The battlefield now arrives through every phone, in every room. But war is not only bombs and borders. It is the public eruption of private corruption. It begins where envy, pride, resentment, and domination have already been normalized.
We know. Be
Nations
safe.
do not invent violence
I will.
overnight.
I'll miss you.
They cultivate it in smaller habits
love you.
first. In contempt, in lies, in dehumanizing language, in the thrill of humiliating an enemy. Once those seeds grow, the machinery of war becomes easier to justify and much harder to stop. A pastor in rural Georgia once told his congregation something simple. Before men burned cities, they first let anger rule smaller rooms. He meant kitchens, boardrooms, courtrooms, schools, state houses, and church meetings. He meant the human heart. Scripture warns that hatred is never small for long. Civilization ignores that warning at its own peril. Look closely at the aftermath of every conflict. Ruined apartment blocks, missing fathers, silent schools, grandparents carrying children across train platforms with one bag and no future guarantee. No ideology is worth that photograph. No leader bleeds as much as the families beneath the flags. Yet history keeps repeating the lesson because power intoxicates those who believe consequence belongs to someone else. War, then, is not random thunder. It is accumulated moral weather. It is what happens when pride acquires weapons. And once that fire spreads, it lights the path for another catastrophe. Because after the bombs and fear come empty shelves, collapsing trust, and the slow humiliation of hunger. Economic collapse does not always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it looks ordinary. It looks like a grocery receipt in Sacramento that suddenly feels insulting. It looks like a retired mechanic in Indiana turning off the heat in one room to save money. It looks like a single mother in Houston skipping her own meals so her children do not notice how tight the month has become. It looks like a farmer in Iowa paying more for fuel, feed, and repairs while earning less certainty from the land. The numbers move first. The pain arrives later. For many people, financial distress is terrifying because it attacks memory. Years of labor, double shifts, overtime, missed birthdays, aching knees. All of it was supposed to build stability. That was the bargain. Work hard, save carefully, and old age will soften. But inflation, debt, speculation, corruption, and supply shocks can turn decades of effort into a paper illusion. A nest egg becomes a shrinking shadow. A pension feels less like security and more like a countdown. And hunger is not only the absence of food. It has layers. There is literal hunger, where prices climb and quality drops, where families buy cheaper products filled with chemicals and call it survival. There is hidden hunger, where bodies are full but health is starved. where the nation eats constantly and still grows sicker. Then there is moral hunger, harder to measure and easier to ignore. People consume more content, more outrage, more convenience, and yet feel emptier, harsher, less human. In American towns, this spiritual malnutrition has become visible. Fast food on every corner, pharmacies full, anxiety everywhere, dinner eaten in cars, parents exhausted, children restless, elderly people isolated in apartments with television as company. A country can be materially stocked and emotionally starving at the same time. That is one of the great contradictions of modern abundance. Some would argue this is just economics. Markets rise and fall, shortages come and go. That is partly true. But when a society sacrifices restraint, honesty, and responsibility for endless appetite, the consequences move beyond policy. Greed distorts institutions, fraud infects opportunity, desperation sharpens conflict, and ordinary people, the ones who played by the rules, become collateral damage. That is why hunger frightens people so deeply. It strips away the story that money alone can protect a home. Once the pantry feels uncertain, people begin to realize how little control they actually possess. And when that realization lands in a world already wounded by sickness and war, nature itself begins to sound less like scenery and more like a warning. The earth has a way of ending arguments. You can debate ideology all night in a television studio, but when the ground moves, the debate stops. When a river crosses its banks in the middle of the night, labels become useless. When hurricane winds tear roofs from homes in Louisiana, when wildfires race through California canyons, when drought grips farmland in the West, when tornadoes rip through Alabama towns that looked peaceful at sunset, people remember something basic. Nature does not negotiate with arrogance. For too long, modern society treated the land as a warehouse. Forests became inventory, rivers became tools, mountains became opportunities, animals became units, soil became a production surface. Even the sky became a dumping ground for excess and a backdrop for ambition. To many, that was progress. To others, it was sacrilege. Either way, consequence was never canceled. It was delayed. There is a spiritual and practical dimension to this. Practically, reckless extraction, pollution, weak stewardship, and short-term thinking destabilize the environment that sustains life. Spiritually, a civilization that sees creation only as property eventually forgets gratitude. It forgets restraint. It forgets that dominion without reverence becomes abuse. When reverence disappears, excess follows. When excess becomes normal, collapse begins to seem like bad luck instead of the final bill. Think of a coastal town after a storm. The church sign blown sideways, boats on roads, family photographs floating in brown water, a child's shoe in the debris, wealthy homes and modest trailers ruined by the same tide. Disaster has a brutal honesty. It reminds every class, every party, every background that mortality is the great equalizer. Brick and glass can resist only so much. And yet, even here there is a hard truth many avoid. Disasters do not merely destroy structures. They expose priorities. Who checked on neighbors? Who exploited panic? Who opened the church doors? Who raised prices? Who looted? Who prayed? Who blamed? A storm can uncover the true architecture of a community faster than years of ordinary life. That is why the fifth warning matters. It tells us that material confidence can vanish in a single season. The house, the truck, the savings, the carefully renovated kitchen, the patio built for grandchildren, while all of it can become temporary overnight. When people finally see that, some grow wiser, others grow harder. And into that confusion step the next danger, the people who feed on fear and wear human faces. Not every predator looks dangerous. Some wear tailored suits. Some quote scripture. Some smile from polished stages. Some call themselves mentors, advisors, activists, or visionaries. They learn the language people trust, then use it to empty bank accounts, split families, and bend minds. In uncertain times, False guides multiply. Fear creates demand. Manipulators build supply. An elderly couple in Nevada can spend 40 years saving and lose everything to one smooth phone call. A church member in Tennessee can hand over her retirement to a man who knew exactly when to say, "God told me." A son and daughter can drag each other into court over property their parents once hoped would keep the family together. These are not rare tragedies anymore. They are features of a culture where greed has learned to dress like sincerity. The sixth warning is moral fraud. Not simple theft, but corruption of trust itself. It is what happens when conscience becomes negotiable and performance replaces character. America has always admired confidence. In the right hands, confidence builds leadership. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. A practiced liar can sell ruin more effectively than an honest man can sell caution. That is why deception spreads fastest in anxious societies. People do not merely need answers. They need relief. The deceiver offers emotional relief first, then takes everything else. This danger reaches far beyond money. It infects institutions. Schools teach cleverness without wisdom. Media rewards outrage over truth. Politics treats citizens as tools. Even religion can become a marketplace where charisma is mistaken for holiness. Christ warned repeatedly about wolves in sheep's clothing. That warning grows sharper in an age where appearance is easier to manufacture than integrity. The saddest damage is not financial. It is relational. Once trust is repeatedly violated, families become suspicious, churches become divided, communities grow cynical, and people stop believing goodness is real. That is a devastating spiritual injury. A nation can survive many hardships. It struggles to survive when enough people conclude that everyone is acting. And after deception weakens the soul of public life, another force enters the home more quietly. It does not knock down the door. It glows in the palm. It sits on the nightstand. It enters through bedrooms, dinner tables, and children's eyes. It calls itself connection. Too often it leaves behind isolation. The modern prison is rarely made of steel. It is made of attention, notifications, endless scroll, algorithmic seduction, blue light at midnight. The seventh warning is not technology itself. Technology can heal, teach, coordinate, and rescue. The danger lies in what happens when tools stop serving human beings and begin training them. In many American homes, that shift has already taken place. At dinner in suburban Charlotte, 4 people sit at one table and live in 4 separate worlds. In a small apartment outside Detroit, a teenage boy laughs online with strangers and barely speaks to his mother. In Seattle, a young woman cannot sleep without checking her phone 3 more times. In rural Oklahoma, grandparents pray over grandchildren whose moods are being shaped more by digital currents than by family, school, or church. The home remains standing, but the inner room of shared life grows emptier. This is not a sentimental complaint about new gadgets. It is a profound spiritual concern. Human beings become what they repeatedly attend to. If attention is constantly fragmented, moral formation weakens. If identity is outsourced to screens, the soul grows unstable. If outrage is rewarded, outrage multiplies. If vanity is monetized, humility becomes harder to practice. The technology may be modern, but the temptation is ancient. Pride, envy, lust, mockery, vanity, comparison. They now travel at broadband speed. Children are especially vulnerable. Their imaginations are still under construction. Their sense of worth is still tender. When they are raised in digital noise, they may know trends before truth, stimulation before peace, visibility before character. Parents feel this happening and often do not know how to stop it. They are tired. The devices are useful. School requires them. Work requires them. Everything requires them. That is precisely why the danger is so effective. It feels necessary even when it is corrosive. A phone cannot love a child. A feed cannot teach reverence. A screen cannot replace the quiet authority of a father, the tenderness of a mother, nor the moral shape of a faithful home. When those bonds weaken, loneliness grows. And lonely people are easier to manipulate, easier to addict, easier to radicalize, easier to deceive. That is why digital captivity is not a minor issue. It is a battle for attention, memory, self-command, and love. A society that loses those things becomes spiritually defenseless. Then the violence it has normalized in appetite and entertainment begins returning in other forms, demanding payment for the blood it has learned not to notice. A civilization cannot celebrate cruelty forever without becoming cruel. This is the 8th warning, and perhaps the most uncomfortable. A culture that consumes violence daily should not be shocked when violence saturates its atmosphere. This goes beyond crime statistics. It touches appetite, entertainment, commerce, and conscience. People become desensitized slowly. First, they tolerate suffering at a distance, then they monetize it, then they call that normal. Consider how many forms of bloodless cruelty shape public life. Humiliation as entertainment, dehumanizing language in politics, exploitation in labor, addiction sold for profit, food systems built on speed rather than care, endless consumption with little thought for what is damaged, discarded, or destroyed along the way. Not every wrong is equal, but each one trains the conscience to look away. When enough looking away becomes normal, society grows coarser at the root. Some Christian listeners hear this warning in plainly biblical terms. You reap what you sow. Sow contempt, reap division. Sow greed, reap corruption. Sow violence, reap fear. Others may describe it more practically. A society organized around extraction and appetite eventually destabilizes itself. The language differs. The pattern does not. Harm has a way of coming home. This is why so many people now feel the air itself is heavy. Road rage escalates faster. Anxiety deepens faster. Public conversation turns brutal faster. There is a moral exhaustion that no product can fix. Even in prosperous neighborhoods, many people walk around carrying a strange inward pressure, as though something in the atmosphere has gone sour. Perhaps it has. Perhaps a nation repeatedly trained to consume without reverence cannot avoid spiritual contamination. And yet this warning is not a call to self-righteousness. Everyone participates in broken systems somehow. Everyone has blind spots. Everyone has excused things that should have troubled them more. The point is not theatrical guilt. The point is awakening. A person, a family, even a community can decide to stop feeding what deforms them. They can choose restraint over appetite, truth over convenience, mercy over aggression, repentance over denial. Still, awakening often comes late. That is the tragedy of history. People change only after consequences become undeniable. And when a generation refuses correction long enough, the next warning arrives with unbearable force. Not as metaphor, not as mood, as fire. The 9th warning is the one people fear in secret and joke about in public. They call it impossible until the map changes. They call it alarmism until the heat records fall again. They call it fiction until smoke covers cities, power grids strain, military doctrines harden, and every rival nation keeps preparing for scenarios nobody wants to name aloud. The age of fire has 2 faces. One rises from the earth. The other rises from human hands. The first face is environmental fire. Wildfire seasons grow longer. Heat settles over neighborhoods like pressure. Rivers shrink. Crops strain. Insurance collapses in places once thought safe. Entire towns begin to live with evacuation routes as part of ordinary planning. The sky itself changes color over states hundreds of miles away. Children grow up breathing smoke from landscapes they have never seen. Whether one interprets this as climate consequence, failed stewardship, divine warning, or all three, the result is the same. Life becomes more fragile. The second phase is man-made fire, darker and more final. Nuclear fear never really vanished. It merely faded into the background while people distracted themselves. But the machinery remained. Silos remained. Submarines remained. Warheads remained. Doctrines remained. Pride remained. History offers no comfort here. Human beings are fully capable of building the instrument of their own devastation and calling it security. That may be the most chilling pattern of all. Imagine the psychological damage alone. A society already exhausted by plague, conflict, inflation, deception, and isolation begins living under the possibility of catastrophic escalation. Even when the missiles never launch, the spirit suffers. Fear changes politics. Fear changes childhood. Fear changes faith. A generation raised under permanent threat becomes reactive, brittle, suspicious, and willing to trade too much freedom for too little peace. But if fire is the ninth warning, it still does not finish the story. Fire destroys, it does not sort. After the burning comes the separating. After public collapse comes private reckoning. After consequence comes judgment, whether one understands that word in theological terms or in the plain moral sense, that every life eventually reveals what it has loved most. And that brings us to the final threshold. Not merely destruction, but division. Not merely loss, but exposure. The moment when the noise falls away, and what remains is character, faith, mercy, truth, and the condition of the soul. The 10th warning is separation. Not fantasy, not spectacle. Separation, the kind that arrives when illusion runs out. When institutions fail, when wealth cannot negotiate one more hour, when reputation loses value, when no title, passport, bunker, portfolio, or influence can answer the only question that finally matters. What kind of person did this age leave behind? Some will call that judgment before God. Others will call it the unavoidable unveiling of consequence. Either way, the meaning is severe. A human being can spend decades accumulating status while neglecting the soul. A family can build a beautiful house while letting resentment rot the inside. A nation can speak constantly of freedom while becoming enslaved to appetite, vanity, and fear. Eventually, the outer shell cracks, and the inner truth stands exposed. But this is not where the story ends in despair. Even in the darkest sermons of history, a door remains open. Not a magical device, not an elite escape plan, not a bunker for the rich. The only durable shelter is spiritual and moral. Some old American preachers might have called it the shelter of holy fire, not because flames protect, but because truth burns away what cannot endure. That shelter is built through ordinary faithfulness, refusing cruelty even in private appetites, praying when panic would be easier, kneeling in repentance instead of defending pride, practicing generosity without spectacle, guarding the tongue from poison, guarding the home from constant noise, teaching children gratitude, self-command, and reverence, returning, however imperfectly, to the teachings of Christ, mercy, humility, restraint, truth, forgiveness, and love, strong enough to outlast fear. No one is asked to become flawless overnight. The call is simpler and harder. Wake up, turn back, clean the inner room, strengthen the family altar, whether that is a church pew, a kitchen prayer, a quiet Bible at dawn, or a long overdue apology. The point is not performance, it is alignment. A life anchored in grace can stand where panic collapses. And so the question is not whether the world feels unstable. It does. The question is what you will build while it shakes. If this message stayed with you, write your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because in an age of noise, even one honest warning may still save a soul.